One of my coaching clients said to me that she wants to make impact. So I asked her, what does impact mean to you? And to her, impact means transforming someone's life. But when I think of impact, I think of global mass scale reach. Both interpretations are valid. So before I explain what rose-tinted glasses, the title of this podcast, means to me, I'd like to invite you to think about what that expression means to you. When we look up the meaning of seeing life through rose-tinted glasses, this is what we get. Seeing life through rose-tinted glasses is an idiom that describes an optimistic outlook on life, often to the point of being unrealistic. It suggests a tendency to focus on the positive aspects while ignoring or downplaying the negative ones. This can lead to a view of the world that is overly cheerful and detached from reality. This is a rather negative description, but bypassing means to go around or avoid something, especially things like discomfort, conflict, or pain. For example, if someone says, "Everything happens for a reason," immediately after you share something painful, they may not be trying to connect with you. They may be trying to bypass the discomfort of sitting with your reality. This is where the distinction is important. In that definition, two other words often get swept up unfairly: positivity and optimism. These are often used interchangeably, but they're not the same thing. There's a common misconception that optimistic people are always happy or that they never acknowledge what's wrong. But that's not optimism. That is straight up denial. You can be grieving, anxious, even depressed, and still be optimistic. Optimism is a belief that things can get better, that what you're facing is temporary, and that is rooted in hope, not avoidance. Positivity, on the other hand, is more about how we frame or respond to life in the moment. It's the attitude we carry now, not necessarily the belief that we hold about what is coming. So while bypassing skips over the hard parts, optimism moves through them, with the faith that there's something meaningful on the other side. Growing up, I always heard people say that your high school and college years were supposed to be the best years of your life. And I thought, if that's true, then I'm screwed, because as a teenager, I struggled with chronic depression and anxiety due to bullying. I internalized everything that had been said to me, and I had, as a result of that, extremely low self-worth. My parents' response was simply that was part of life. So I looked for comfort online on websites like Tumblr and online dress-up games like Startle and Go Supermodel. I went to therapy for the first time when I was 18, and I was put on Xanax at age 19. My social anxiety was so bad that I'd rather fail a class than do a presentation in front of it. Somehow, I did make it out of college with 2 degrees. I had my first big girl job at a marketing agency lined up before graduation. I was working an extra job on the side. I had a boyfriend. I was eating right, working out, and socializing on the weekends. I had done all the right things according to societal standards, yet I still felt dead inside. So my logical conclusion was that some people were just born happy, and I was not one of those lucky few. At that point, I had been going to therapy for a couple of years, and while talking about how I felt helped me feel seen and understood, nothing was changing. I was still struggling. So I turned to personal development on YouTube. And the first personal development book I picked up was The Power of Positive Thinking by Norman Vincent Peale. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. That line is a direct quote from the Bible, and Peale often refers to it as a powerful affirmation of faith and inner strength. He encourages readers to repeat it regularly as a way to reinforce confidence, reduce fear, and tap into divine support. But after reading that first affirmation, I was like, nope, I'm done, because I considered myself an atheist at the time. As a kid, I did believe in God, and I often talked to him before going to bed, until the bullying incident that made me dissociate from my body for 14 years. That was the day I stopped believing in God. Shortly after putting down that book, I needed to get a new pair of glasses. I picked up these dusty rose, subtle cat eye glasses, and I posted a selfie to social media with the caption, "From now on, I see life through rose-tinted glasses." What can I say? I'm just a girl and I like romanticizing life. As much as I wish I could say that making a conscious attempt at thinking more positively would solve all my problems, it did not. But it did start a series of synchronous events in my life. I got fired from my job at the marketing agency and I got broken up with the same day. I was devastated, but crying in bed was not an option. Say at home, we didn't speak about emotions. We just pretended that everything was fine, even when it wasn't. I started exploring all options because I had no clear vision for what I wanted to do with my life. I even remember applying for flight attendant jobs, and I got through the selection rounds. But in the end, I got hired at the very same optical store I bought these glasses from. What a coincidence. A month later, they opened a location closer to where I lived. I ended up working there for 3 years. Initially, the plan was to stay just a couple of months as a retail assistant while I was looking for a better job. But then I got promoted to in-store trainer, then assistant store manager, and eventually store manager. I managed to move out of my parents' house into a beautiful townhouse just outside of the city center of Bruges, which had a stained glass window over the main entrance that spelled Nirvana. Nirvana is a primarily Buddhist concept that refers to a state of perfect peace, happiness, free from suffering, and the cycle of rebirth, also referred to as samsara. It signifies the extinguishing of desires and attachments, leading to liberation. In simpler terms, it can be understood as the ultimate religious goal of Buddhism, a state of enlightenment. Now, I'm not saying that I've reached a state of enlightenment by any means, because the more I am learning and the more I am willing to change my perspectives on things that I once believed were true, the more I realize I actually know nothing at all. Anyway, that's when the global pandemic hit, plot twist, and I was put on furlough, and so was my roommate who worked in hospitality. I thoroughly enjoyed this time off. I was still struggling with social anxiety, but now I no longer lived at home. I was coping by drinking on the weekends and smoking after work to unwind or relax. I grew up in a strict household and was not allowed to go out, so I felt like I was finally catching up with my teenage years, and having to stay at home was my introvert's dream. I finally got around to reading a book that had been on my bedside table for months. The book in question was A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle. That book made me realize that there wasn't anything wrong with me specifically, and that I am having a normal reaction to the state of the world and our society. I'm going to read you a little excerpt from the book. One of the most extraordinary shifts that is taking place on our planet at present is that the awakening of consciousness is no longer a luxury or an accident, but a necessity if humanity wants to survive. That spiritual awakening, whether on an individual or collective level, may well begin with the realization that much of what we consider what normal is in fact deeply insane. After reading that book, I found a sense of hope and meaning in life that I had never felt before, and I wanted to share it with everyone. So, of course, I started by telling my roommate. He jokingly said, "You're reaching your personal nirvana here at Nirvana." After reading Eckhart Tolle, my TikTok algorithm quickly changed and started suggesting more New Age content. I started reading Joe Dispenza's Becoming Supernatural and wanted to manifest freedom, not fully realizing what that would look like. A few days later, a graphic designer friend reached out. She needed copy for a client of hers. I'd worked as a copywriter at a marketing agency before, so I gave it a shot. I ended up making 1/3 of my monthly income, working only 10 hours that week. And that's when the lens of limitation started shifting. And that's also when the book and the podcast idea emerged. Because I was on a mission, I was determined to share this newfound information and knowledge with the world because I thought that I had it all figured out at that point. Silly me. The lockdown flew by and I continued doing copywriting on the side, but selling glasses was never the same. I kept doing the math of how much more I could be making if I went all in on copywriting, but I was too insecure to become self-employed, and my direct environment kept saying how risky starting a business was. So I fell back into my old routine. The podcast and the book idea started gathering dust, and I got diagnosed with yet another burnout. And that's when I decided to finally take the leap. Now, full transparency, I was in a long-distance relationship at the time, and I wanted nothing more than to close the distance. So when he offered for me to move in, I did just a few months later. The first year of being self-employed was brutal. When I started, I was delusional, not for thinking that I could make a living out of digital writing, but for thinking that just because I enjoyed writing, everything would now magically fall into place. Why wouldn't it, right? All the writing and translation gigs I had done up until that point came through me through referrals. I'd never actively looked for extra work because it was just nice to have some extra money on top of my salary. And I manifested this, right? I didn't know anything about sales, client onboarding, client fulfillment, finances, and I didn't really care to educate myself on it. I guess this is a direct example of spiritual bypassing. That was until I had no other choice. A year of winging it drained my finances, so I either had to make it work or close the business and find a new job. And I didn't want to give up the business. I knew that I could always get another job, but I didn't want to. Even though I was in the worst burnout to date, I had recently been diagnosed with ADHD and autism. I was in full-on skill regression. I had to move back in with my parents at the age of 27, and then I later moved in with my granddad. I had outgrown a lot of friends, but I was determined that this was not the end. I remained optimistic, but I sure as hell wasn't feeling positive. I took a major leap out of my comfort zone and I joined a co-working space. I forced myself to socialize, and that same week I landed 2 new clients, a ghostwriting gig for a sales coach and a creative director position at a video marketing agency where I worked video scripts and voiceovers. I invested most of the money I made back into courses and coaching. Things were starting to look better, but I still wasn't taking action on the things that truly mattered to me, the book and the podcast. And that's when the burnout cycle started all over again. Burnout doesn't just come from overworking. It comes from being misaligned with work and having to show up anyway, which is usually the case when you need to make sure there's enough money coming in. Now, I'm not saying those jobs were misaligned. In fact, they were exactly what I needed when I walked into that co-working space, and without them, I would have never grown as much as I did. But eventually, you outgrow things. And when you start realizing you've outgrown things, you can either change direction and iterate, or hold on until you physically feel like you can't take it anymore. And that seems to be my preferred way of going through life, although I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. So now I am in the process of rebuilding the business and my life for that matter in a way that prioritizes creativity and connection. Because the saying is true, you cannot pour from an empty cup. All of that is to say that even though I was struggling mentally, emotionally, financially, physically, I stayed optimistic. Again, I was not feeling particularly positive, but I kept consciously choosing to see things from a positive angle, even when things weren't looking so rose-colored. And that summarizes the message I want to spread through this podcast and this platform. Believing in and working towards a positive future even when facing challenges, or when the future might not look so bright from your current perspective. What can you expect from future episodes? I'll be sharing perspectives, both from myself and some exciting guests, about nervous system regulation, subconscious reprogramming, business, creativity, and spirituality. I'm curious about your interpretation of the expression seeing life through rose-tinted glasses, so please do let me know in the comments. If you'd like to stay up to date about future episodes and my book, Beyond the Lens of Limitation, which will be launching May 2026, you can follow me on Spotify and subscribe to my YouTube channel or Substack. That is all for today. Thanks for listening, and I'll be talking to you next Sunday.